Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are again at wsradio.com, and it's time for Ether Tale Radio Theater. And tonight, well, it's Dragon Tales tonight. Ever since we got news that Game of Thrones won't be broadcast again till 2019, when we realized that you wouldn't be having any dragons, that we thought we should tell y'all our favorite dragon tales. And I recently got back from Europe, and there was a lot of dragon references as I was doing my tours of various catacombs and dungeons and whatnot, and always a dragon story here and there. So it was just a sign that tonight we should bring you some dragon tales. And I think we'll start with a very a short one from Melanie that's quite charming and unusual. And what is this entitled to be titled, Miss Melanie?
This one is called Miss Cubbage and the Dragon of Romance.
Well, I'd love to hear that.
Okay, then. This tale is told in the balconies of Belgrave Square and among the towers of Pont Street. Men sing it at evening in the Brompton Road. Little upon her 18th birthday, thought Miss Cubbage of number 12 Prince of Wales Square, that before another year had gone its way she would lose the sight of that unshapely oblong that was so long her home. And had you told her further that within that year all trace of that so-called square, and of the day when her father was elected by a thumping majority to share in the guidance of the destinies of the empire, should utterly fade from her memory, she would merely have said in that affected voice of hers, "Go to!" There was nothing about it in the daily press. The policy of her father's party had no provision for it. There was no hint of it in the conversation at evening parties to which Miss Cubbage went. There was nothing to warn her at all that a loathsome dragon with golden scales that rattled as he went should have come up clean out of the prime of romance and gone by night, so far as we know, through Hammersmith and come to Ardle Mansions, and then had turned to his left, which of course brought him to Miss Cubbage's father's house. There sat Miss Cubbage at evening on her balcony quite alone, waiting for her father to be made a baronet. She was wearing walking boots and a hat and a low-necked evening dress, for a painter was just now painting her portrait, and neither she nor the painter saw anything odd in this strange combination. She did not notice the roar of the dragon's golden scales, nor distinguish above the manifold lights of London the small red glare of his eyes. He suddenly lifted his head, a blaze of gold, over the balcony. He did not appear a yellow dragon then, for his glistening scales reflected the beauty that London puts upon her only at evening and night. She screamed, but to no knight, nor knew what knight to call on, nor guessed where the dragon's overthrowers of far romantic days, nor what mightier game they chased, or what wars they waged. Perchance they were busy even then arming for Armageddon. Out of the balcony of her father's house in Prince of Wales Square, the painted dark green balcony that grew blacker every year, the dragon lifted Miss Cubbage and spread his rattling wings, and London fell away like an old fashion. And England fell away, and the smoke of its factories, and the round material world that goes humming round the sun, vexed and pursued by time, until there appeared the eternal and ancient lands of romance, lying low by mystical seas. You had not pictured Miss Cubbage stroking the golden head of one of the dragons of song with one hand idly, while with the other she sometimes played with pearls brought up from lonely places of the sea. They filled huge haliotis shells with pearls and laid them there besides her. They brought her emeralds, which she set to flash among the tresses of her long black hair. They brought her threaded sapphires for her cloak. All this the princes of fable did, and the elves and the gnomes of myth. And partly she still lived, and partly she was one with long ago and with those sacred tales that nurses tell, when all their children are good, and evening has come, and the fire is burning well, and the soft pat-pat of the snowflakes on the panes is like the furtive tread of fearful things in old enchanted woods. If at first she missed those dainty novelties among which she was reared, the old sufficient song of the mystical sea, singing of fairy lore, at first soothed and at last consoled her. Even she forgot those advertisements of pills that are so dear to England. Even she forgot political cant and the things that one discusses and the things that one does not, and had perforce to content herself with seeing sailing by huge golden-laden galleons with treasure for Madrid, and the merry skull and crossbones of the privateers, and the tiny nautilus settling out to sea, and ships of heroes trafficking in romance, or of princes seeking for enchanted isles. It was not by chains that the dragon kept her there, but by one of the spells of old. To one to whom the facilities of the daily press had for so long been accorded, spells would have palled, you would have said, and galleons after a time, and all things out of date after a time. But whether the centuries passed her, or whether the years, or whether no time at all, she did not know. If anything indicated the passing of time, it was the rhythm of elfin horns blowing upon the heights. If the centuries went by her, the spell that bound her gave her also perennial youth, and kept her alight, forever the lantern by her side, and saved from decay the marble palace facing the mystical sea. And if no time went by her there at all, her single moment on those marvelous coasts was turned, as it were, to a crystal reflecting 1,000 scenes. If it was all a dream, it was a dream that knew no morning and no fading away. The tide roamed on and whispered of mastery and of myth, while near that captive lady, asleep in his marble tank, the golden dragon dreamed. And a little way out from the coast, all that the dragon dreamed showed faintly in the mist that lay over the sea. He never dreamed of any rescuing night. So long as he dreamed, it was twilight. But when he came up nimbly out of his tank, night fell and starlight glistened on the dripping golden scales. There he and his captive either defeated time or never encountered him at all. While in the world we know raged Roncesvalles or battles yet to be, I know not to what part of the shore of romance he bore her. Perhaps she became one of those princesses of whom fable loves to tell, but let it suffice that there she lived by the sea, and kings ruled, and demons ruled, and kings came again, and many cities returned to their native dust, and still she abided there, and still her marble palace passed not away, nor the power that there was in the dragon's spell. And only once did there ever come to her a message from the world that of old she knew. It came in a pearly ship across the mystical sea. It was from an old school friend that she had had in Putney, merely a note, no more. In a little neat round hand it said, "It is not proper for you to be there alone."
Well, thank you, Miss Melanie. The punchline to that story was quite surprising, wasn't it?
Yes.
But delightful. I thought of you immediately when I came across it. Thank you for reading that tonight.
Thank you very much. I sometimes long to be whisked away to the world of romance.
In fact, your husband is taking you away soon enough, isn't he?
Yes.
And you'll have to do some additional dragon research for us when you go there, because you'll be in Scotland, for instance.
Yes, I'm going to be in the UK for a couple of weeks in April, and so we'll be in England and then in Scotland, and I'll look around for fun tales to bring back to tell on the air.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll see what I can do.
Thank you, Miss
What I
Melanie.
won't bring back is haggis.
Well, yes, no one needs to have that.
Damn, it's kind of illegal to go ahead and do
Yes.
I
so.
don't know. I
So-
tried it one time, and I know why they drink scotch, because it sticks to your teeth.
Oh.
So I have a second story tonight, and it's from a book, a very old book, from around 1913, Fairy Tales from Spain, and this is The Treasure of the Dragon. An old sailor brought to my town the news of having seen, in a very distant island, a terrible dragon which guarded an immense treasure. Half of the body of this guardian was a fish, the other half a lion. It, moreover, had such powerful wings that it could rise to an extraordinary height. Air, water, or land were his elements, and when any ships came near to the coast, they were soon attacked by that ever-vigilant monster. Many expeditions were made, but all succumbed to the talons of that invincible animal. Moreover, the treasure was so splendid that it excited the envy of adventurers from all parts of the earth. Among the innumerable precious stones, which with thousands of gold bars formed those riches, there was a statue of natural size made out of a single diamond, and which was worth such a fabulous sum that all the treasures of the earth would not suffice to buy it. The fear of the dragon did not lessen the enthusiasm of the lads of my town. On the contrary, it was a further stimulus to their bravery and daring, and so, in little less than a month, an expedition was formed of the bravest and most ambitious. They set out on the 15th of September on a bark named the Temeraire, a handsome brigantine, the swiftest that ever glided over the waves. After 14 days of sailing, they found themselves at about a league from the island where the treasure and the dragon were. Behold what happened. The members of the expedition met in council in order to take their measures, and agreed as follows: to launch some boats in order to land in 3 or 4 places at the same time, to carry a great quantity of ammunition so as to be able to fire upon the dragon, and lastly, to divide the treasure in equal parts and to distribute it among the expeditionaries. There was only one vote against, that of a cabin boy, a youth of 18, who opposed the dividing of the party, believing it better to wait for the dragon on board the ship, and from there to fight it with cannons. "If you are afraid, stay behind," they all said to him, and nobody paid any attention to the cabin boy's scheme. As nobody trusted his companions, all embarked in the bunches, fearful of being cheated if they did not witness the division of the treasure, leaving on board only the cabin boy and the pilot, a very experienced old sailor who had not uttered any opinion at the meeting. The launches being full and the crews armed, they left the ship and rowed near to the coast. Pasquale, for so the cabin boy was named, prepared the bow gun, loading it up to the mouth, and also seized a strong, sharp spear. Then he sat down in the bows, and from there, with a telescope, watched the progress of his companions. The latter were about 100 yards from the coast when a tremendous roar was heard. He saw the dragon fly up into the air and fall upon one of the launches. Several gunshots were heard, and soon the launch disappeared under the water. The bullets glanced off the skin of the terrible animal, which threw itself in turn upon the other launches and sank them. Its work of extermination finished, the dragon returned to the island, shaking its wings, reddened by the blood of its victims. The pilot, terrified, wished to go back to his country, but Pasquale prevented it and directed him to go at full sail towards the island. The pilot gave way to the solicitations of the cabin boy, who now no longer thought of the treasure, but of avenging the death of his companions. They had arrived at some 100 fathoms from the coast when they saw the dragon, which was advancing towards them. Pasquale rapidly aimed the small cannon, but the ball struck on some rocks, and the dragon, more irritated than ever, threw himself upon the brigantine. It described a couple of circles in the air, like an eagle choosing its prey, and at length threw itself upon Pasquale, who, mounted on a roundhouse, valiantly waited for it. Such was the violence of the attack that the dragon, on attempting to break the spear with which the boy greeted it, sent it quite through one of its claws, and so great was the pain that it made a horrible outcry and rose up in the air full of terrible frenzy. The spear remained fixed in the claw, and to it hung Pasquale, who, by his weight, increased the woes of the dragon. In vain the latter tried to get rid of that singular guest. All its efforts were useless. Pasquale bestrode the spear like an enthusiastic gymnast. Then, becoming furious, it threw itself into the sea in order to drown him. Pasquale swam like a fish and dived like a seal, so his enemy was not able to liberate itself from him. Being now desperate, it went to the island, dragging the cabin boy with it. The latter had hardly touched terra firma when, using the spear as a lever, he gave it a turn with all his might, twisting the wounded claw in such a way that the pain deprived the monster of its strength and consciousness. Giving a cry, it fell to the ground, defenseless. Pasquale then got out his jackknife and looked with care for the joints between the formidable scales which served the dragon as armor. There he thrust it many times with the aid of a stone which he used in place of a hammer. The dragon was now dead, and Pasquale thought of his companions and went down to the shore to seek them. His search was useless, for he did not even find a trace of them. He looked towards the spot where he had left the brigantine, and that had also disappeared. Doubtless the old pilot was afraid and had gone away with the ship. Then our hero decided to seek the treasure, but in vain. He went over the island in all directions. He found not the least sign of it. Then he returned to the spot where he had seen the dragon lying when they had approached the island, and he saw that there was an enormous stone, which no doubt covered the entrance of the grotto where the treasure was to be found. He applied the spear to the joints and succeeded in moving it, and after some effort he brought into view a winding staircase, down which he hurriedly went. The first room to which the staircase gave access had its walls covered with rubies, the second with emeralds, and the third with pearls and diamonds. In the center stood the magnificent statue made out of a single diamond, and which represented a very beautiful princess. Pasquale was astounded at such extraordinary beauty and burst into an exclamation of admiration. Presently he noticed the pedestal of the statue, on which might be read, "In a stone lies the disenchantment." Then the cabin boy looked at all the projections of the room, and pressing one of them heard a creak, and instantaneously, as the scenes in a fairy comedy are changed, the grotto disappeared. Each precious stone was changed into a human being, and the beautiful princess again turned to flesh and blood, came slowly down from her pedestal, and giving her hand to the valiant lad, offered to reward his bravery by giving him all the riches of her kingdom, and with them her heart. Among the disenchanted beings were all his companions of the expedition, who embraced Pasquale, and, what was very strange, did not envy him, recognizing that his triumph was deserved. All the destroyed boats appeared on the coast, and in them they embarked, each one going to his own country, and the cabin boy to that of the princess. Pasquale is no longer Pasquale, but His Highness Prince Pasquale the First, a very good man, according to what his subjects say. Well, that was a happy ending for him.
Nice.
And we have one more dragon story, and this one very amusing, and Gabriel Pan is going to read it for us.
This one's a lovely little tale by, I think, E. Nesbitt, called The Deliverers of Their Country. I suppose by deliverers they mean rescuers. And it begins like this. It all began with Effie's getting something in her eye. It hurt very much indeed, and it felt something like a red-hot spark, only it seemed to have legs as well, and wings like a fly. Effie rubbed and cried, not real crying, but the kind your eye does all by itself without your being miserable inside your mind. And then she went to her father to have the thing in her eye taken out. Effie's father was a doctor, so of course he knew how to take things out of eyes. He did it very cleverly with a soft paintbrush dipped in castor oil. When he had gotten the thing out, he said, "This is very curious." Effie had often gotten things in her eye before, and her father had always seemed to think it was natural. Rather tiresome and naughty, perhaps, but still natural. He had never thought it curious before. Effie stood holding her handkerchief to her eye and said, "I don't believe it's out." People always say this when they've had something in their eyes. "Oh, yes, it's out," said the doctor. "Here it is on the brush. This is very interesting." Effie had never heard her father say that about anything she had any share in. She said, "What?" The doctor carried the brush very carefully across the room and held the point of it under his microscope. Then he twisted the brass screws of the microscope and looked through the top with one eye. "Dear me," he said. "Dear, dear me. 4 well-developed limbs, a long caudal appendage, 5 toes, unequal in lengths, almost like one of the Lacertidae. Yet there are traces of wings." The creature under his eye wriggled a little in the castor oil, and he went on. "Yes, a bat-like wing. A new specimen, undoubtedly. Effie, run round to the professor and ask him to be kind enough to step in for a few minutes." "You might give me 6pence, Daddy," said Effie, "because I did bring you the new specimen. I took great care of it inside my eye, and my eye does hurt." The doctor was so pleased with the new specimen that he gave Effie a shilling, and presently the professor stepped round. He stayed to lunch, and he and the doctor quarrelled very happily all the afternoon about the name and the family of the thing that had come out of Effie's eye. But at tea time, another thing happened. Effie's brother Harry fished something out of his tea, which he thought at first was an earwig. He was just getting ready to drop it on the floor and end its life in the usual way, when it shook itself in the spoon, spread 2 wet wings, and flopped onto the tablecloth. There it sat, stroking itself with its feet and stretching its wings, and Harry said, "Why, it's a tiny newt!" The professor leaned forward before the doctor could say the word. "I'll give you 1/2 crown for it, Harry, my lad," he said, speaking very fast. And then he picked it up carefully on his handkerchief. "It's a new specimen," he said, "and finer than yours, doctor." It was a tiny lizard, about 1/2 inch long, with scales and wings. So now the doctor and the professor each had a specimen, and they were both very pleased. But before long, these specimens began to seem less valuable. For the next morning, when the knife boy was cleaning the doctor's boots, he suddenly dropped the brushes and the boot and the blacking and screamed out that he was burnt. And from inside the boot came crawling a lizard as big as a kitten, with large shiny wings. "Why," Effie said, "I know what it is. It's a dragon, like the one St. George killed." And Effie was right. That afternoon Towser was bitten in the garden by a dragon the size of a rabbit, which he had tried to chase. And the next morning all the papers were full of the wonderful winged lizards that were appearing all over the country. The papers would not call them dragons because, of course, no one believes in dragons nowadays. And at any rate, the papers were not going to be so silly as to believe in fairy stories. At first there were only a few, but in a week or two the country was simply running alive with dragons of all sizes, and in the air you could sometimes see them as thick as a swarm of bees. They all looked alike, except as to size. They were green with scales, and they had 4 legs and a long tail, and great wings like bats' wings. Only the wings were a pale, half-transparent yellow, like the gearboxes on bicycles. They breathed fire and smoke, as all proper dragons must, but still the newspapers went on pretending they were lizards, until the editor of the Standard was picked up and carried away by a very large one. And then the other newspaper people had not anyone left to tell them what they ought to believe. So when the largest elephant in the zoo was carried off by a dragon, the papers gave up pretending and put "Alarming Plague of Dragons" at the top of the paper. You have no idea how alarming it was, and at the same time how aggravating. The large-sized dragons were terrible, certainly, but once you had found out that the dragons always went to bed early because they were afraid of the chill night air, you had only to stay indoors all day, and you were pretty safe from the big ones. But the smaller sizes were a perfect nuisance. The ones as big as earwigs got in the soap, and they got in the butter. The ones as big as dogs got in the bath, and the fire and smoke inside them made steam like anything when the cold water tap was turned on. so that careless people were often scalded quite severely. The ones that were as large as pigeons would get into work baskets or corner drawers and bite you when you were in a hurry to get a needle or a handkerchief. The ones as big as sheep were easier to avoid because you could see them coming. But when they flew in at the windows and curled up under your eiderdown, and you did not find them until you went to bed, it was always a shock. The ones this size did not eat people, only lettuce, but they always scorched the sheets and the pillowcases dreadfully. Of course, the county council and the police did everything that could be done. It was no use offering the hand of a princess to anyone who killed a dragon. This way was all very well in olden times, when there was only one dragon and one princess. But now there were far more dragons than princesses, although the royal family was a large one. And besides, it would have been a mere waste of princesses to offer rewards for killing dragons, because everybody killed as many dragons as they could, quite out of their own hands, and without rewards at all, just to get the nasty things out of the way. The county council undertook to cremate all dragons delivered at their offices between the hours of 10 and 2, and whole wagon loads and cart loads and truckloads of dead dragons could be seen any day of the week standing in a long line in the streets where the county council had their offices. Boys brought barrel-loads of dead dragons, and children on their way to home from morning school would call in to leave the handful or two of little dragons they had brought in their satchels or carried in their knotted pocket handkerchiefs. Yet there seemed to be as many dragons as ever. Then the police stuck up great wooden canvas towers covered with patent glue. When the dragons flew against these towers, they stuck fast, as flies and wasps do on sticky papers in the kitchen. And when the towers were covered all over with dragons, the police inspector used to set fire to the towers and burnt them, and dragons and all. And yet there seemed to be more dragons than ever. The shops were full of patent dragon poison and anti-dragon soap, and dragon-proof curtains for the windows. And indeed, everything that could be done was done. And yet, there seemed to be more dragons than ever. It was not very easy now to know what would poison a dragon, because, you see, they ate such different things. The largest kind ate elephants as long as there were any, and then went on with horses and cows. Another size ate nothing but lilies of the valley, and a third size ate only prime ministers, if they were to be had, and if not, would feed freely on servants in their livery. Another size lived on bricks, and 3 of them ate 2/3 of the South Lambeth Infirmary in one afternoon. But the size Effie was most afraid of was about as big as your dining room, and that size ate little boys and girls. At first, Effie and her brother were quite pleased with the change in their lives. It was so amusing to sit up all night instead of going to sleep, and to play in the garden lighted by electric lamps. And it sounded so funny to hear Mother say when they were going to bed, "Good night, my darling, sleep sound all day, and don't get up too soon. You must not get up before it's quite dark. You wouldn't like the nasty dragons to catch you." But after a time, they got very tired of it all. They wanted to see the flowers and trees growing in the fields, and to see the pretty sunshine out of doors, and not just through glass windows and patent dragon-proof curtains. And they wanted to play on the grass, which they were not allowed to do in the electric lamp-lighted garden because of the night dew. And they wanted so much to get out, just for once, in the beautiful, bright, dangerous daylight, that they began to try and think of some reason why they ought to go out. Only they did not like to disobey their mother. But one morning their mother was busy preparing some new dragon poison to lay down in the cellars, and their father was bandaging the hand of the boot boy, which had been scratched by one of the dragons, who liked to eat prime ministers when they were to be had. So nobody remembered to say to the children, "Don't get up till it's quite dark." "Go now," said Harry. "It would not be disobedient to go, and I know exactly what we ought to do, but I don't know how we ought to do it." "What ought we do?" said Effie. "We ought to wake St. George, of course," said Harry. "He was the only person in his town who knew how to manage dragons. The police and the people in the fairy tale don't count, but St. George is a real person, and he is only asleep, and he is waiting to be waked up. Only nobody believes in St. George now. I heard Father say so." "We do," said Effie. "Of course we do. And don't you see, Eff, that's the very reason why we could wake him. You can't wake people if you don't believe in them, can you?" Effie said no, but where would they find St. George? "We must go and look," said Harry boldly. "You shall wear a dragon-proof frock made of the stuff like the curtains, and I will smear myself all over with the best dragon poison, and Effie clasped her hands and skipped with joy and cried, "Oh, Harry, I know where we can find St. George. In St. George's Church, of course." "Oh," said Harry, wishing he had thought of it himself. "You have a little sense sometimes, for a girl." So the next afternoon, quite early, long before the beams of sunset announced the coming night, when everybody would be up and working, the two children got out of bed. Effie wrapped herself in a shawl of dragon-proof muslin. There was no time to make the frock, and Harry made a horrid mess of himself with the patent dragon poison. It was warranted harmless to infants and invalids, so he felt quite safe. Then they joined hands and set out to walk to St. George's Church. As you know, there are many St. George's churches, but fortunately they took the turning that leads to the right one and went along in the bright sunlight, feeling very brave and adventurous. There was no one about in the streets except dragons, and the place was simply swarming with them. Fortunately, none of the dragons were just the right size for eating little boys and girls, or perhaps the story might have had to end there. There were dragons on the pavement, and dragons on the roadway, dragons basking on the front doorsteps of public buildings, and dragons preening their wings on the roofs in the hot sun. The town was quite green with them. Even when the children had gotten out of the town, where they were walking in the lanes, they noticed the fields on each side were greener than usual, with the scaly legs and tails, and some of the smaller sizes had made themselves asbestos nests in the flowering hawthorn hedges. Effie held her brother's hand very tight, and once, when a fat dragon flopped against her ear, she screamed out, and a whole flight of dragons rose from the field at the sound and sprawled away across the sky. The children could hear the rattle of their wings as they flew. "Oh, I want to go home," said Effie. "Don't be silly," said Harry. "Surely you haven't forgotten about the 7 champions and all the princes. People who are going to be their country's deliverers never scream and say they want to go home." "And are we?" asked Effie. "Deliverers, I mean." "You'll see," said her brother, and on they went. When they came to St. George's Church, they found the door open, and they walked right in. But St. George was not there, so they walked around to the churchyard outside, and presently they found the great stone tomb of St. George, with the figure of him carved in marble outside, in his armor and helmet, and with his hands folded on his breast. "However can we wake him?" they said. Then Harry spoke to St. George, but he would not answer. And he called, but St. George did not seem to hear. And then he actually tried to waken the great dragon slayer by shaking his marbled shoulders. But St. George took no notice. Then Effie began to cry, and she put her arms around St. George's neck as well as she could for the marble, which was very much in the way in the back. And she kissed the marble face, and she said, "Oh dear, good, kind St. George, please wake up and help us." And at that, St. George opened his eyes sleepily and stretched himself and said, "What is the matter, little girl?" So the children told him all about it. He turned over in his marble and leaned on one elbow to listen. But when he heard that there were so many dragons, he shook his head. "It's no good," he said. "There would be one too many for poor old George. You should have waked me before. I was always for a fair fight. 1 man, 1 dragon was my motto." Just then a flight of dragons passed overhead, and St. George half drew his sword. But he shook his head again and pushed the sword back as the flight of dragons grew small in the distance. "I can't do anything," he said. "Things have changed since my time. St. Andrew told me about it. They woke him up over the engineers' strike, and he came to talk to me. He said everything is done by machinery now. There must be some way of settling these dragons. By the way, what sort of weather have you been having lately?" This seemed so careless and unkind that Harry would not answer, but Effie said patiently, "It has been very fine. Father says it is the hottest weather there has ever been in this country." "Ah, I guessed as much," said the champion thoughtfully. "Well, the only thing would be, dragons can't stand wet and cold. That's the only thing. If you could find the taps." St. George was beginning to settle down again on his stone slab. "Good night. Very sorry I can't help you," he said, yawning behind his marble hand. "Oh, but you can," cried Effie. "Tell us, what taps?" "Oh, like in the bathroom," said St. George, still more sleepily. "And there's a looking-glass, too. Shows you all the world and what's going on. St. Denis told me about it. Said it was a very pretty thing. I'm sorry I can't. Good night." And he fell back onto his marble and was fast asleep again in a moment. "We shall never find the taps," said Harry. "I say, wouldn't it be awful if St. George woke up when there was a dragon near, the size that each champion's?" Effie pulled off her dragon-proof veil. "We didn't meet any the size of a dining room as we came along," she said. "I dare say we shall be quite safe." So she covered St. George with the veil, and Harry rubbed off as much as he could of the dragon poison onto St. George's armor, so as to make everything quite safe for him. "We might hide in the church till it's dark," he said, "and then—" But at that moment a dark shadow fell on them, and they saw that it was a dragon exactly the size of a dining room at home. So then they knew that all was lost. The dragon swooped down and caught the two children in his claws. He caught Effie by her green silk sash, and Harry by the little point at the back of his Eton jacket. And then, spreading his great yellow wings, he rose into the air, rattling like a third-class carriage when the brake is hard on. "Oh, Harry," said Effie, "I wonder when he will eat us." The dragon was flying across the woods and fields with great flaps of his wings that carried him 1/4 of a mile at each flap. Harry and Effie could see the country below, hedges and rivers and churches and farmhouse, flowing away from under them, much faster than you see them running away from the sides of the fastest express train. And still the dragon flew on. The children saw other dragons in the air as they went, but the dragon who was big as the dining room never stopped to speak to any of them, but just flew on quite steadily. "He knows where he wants to go," said Harry. "Oh, if he would only drop us before he gets there." But the dragon held on tight, and he flew and flew and flew, until at last, when the children were quite giddy, he settled down with a rattling of all his scales on the top of a mountain. And there he lay on his great green scaly side, panting, very much out of breath, because he had come such a long way. But his claws were fast in Effie's sash, and the little point at the back of Harry's Eton jacket. Then Effie took out the knife Harry had given her on her birthday. It had only cost 6 pence to begin with, and she had had it a month, and it could never sharpen anything but slate pencils. But somehow she managed to make that knife cut her sash in the front, and crept out of it, leaving the dragon with only a green silk bow in one of his claws. That knife would have never cut Harry's jacket tail off, though, and when Effie had tried for some time, she saw that this was so, and gave it up. But with her help, Harry managed to wriggle quietly out of his sleeves, so that the dragon had only an Eton jacket in his other claw. Then the children crept on tiptoe to a crack in the rocks and got in. It was much too narrow for the dragon to get in also, so they stayed in there and waited to make faces at the dragon when he felt rested enough to sit up and think about eating them. He was very angry indeed when they made faces at him, and blew out fire and smoke at them. But they ran farther into the cave, so that he could not reach them, and when he was tired of blowing, he went away. But they were afraid to come out of the cave, so they went farther in, and presently the cave opened out and grew bigger, and the floor was soft sand. And when they'd come to the very end of the cave, there was a door, and on it was written, "Universal Tap Room, Private, No One Allowed Inside." So they opened the door at once, just to peep in, and then they remembered what St. George had said. "We can't be worse off than we are," said Harry, "with a dragon waiting for us outside. Let's go in." They went boldly into the tap room and shut the door behind him. And now they were in a sort of room cut out of the solid rock, and all along one side of the room were taps, and all of the taps were labeled with china labels like you see in baths. And as they could both read words of 2 syllables, or even 3 sometimes, they understood at once that they had gotten to the place where the weather is turned on from. There were 6 big taps labeled sunshine, wind, rain, snow, hail, and ice, and a lot of little ones labeled fair to moderate, showery, south breeze, nice growing weather for the crops, skating, good open weather, south wind, east wind, and so on. And the big tap labeled sunshine was turned full on. They could not see any sunshine. The cave was lighted by a glass skylight of blue glass, so they supposed the sunlight was pouring out by some other way, as it does with the tap that washes out the underneath parts of patent sinks and kitchens. Then they saw that one side of the room was just a big looking-glass, and when you looked in it, you could see everything that was going on in the world, and all at once, too, which is not like most looking-glasses. They saw the carts delivering the dead dragons at the county council offices, and they saw St. George asleep under the dragon-proof veil, and they saw their mother at home crying because her children had gone out into the dreadful, dangerous daylight, and she was afraid a dragon had eaten them. And they saw the whole of England like a great puzzle map, green in the field parts, and brown in the towns, and black in the places where they make coal and crockery and cutlery and chemicals. All over it, on the black parts and on the brown and on the green, there was a network of green dragons, and they could see that it was still broad daylight, and no dragons had gone to bed yet. Effie said, "Dragons do not like cold," and she tried to turn off the sunshine, but the tap was out of order, and that's why there had been so much hot weather, and why the dragons had been able to be hatched. So they left the sunshine tap alone, and they turned on the snow and left the tap full on while they went to the looking-glass. There they saw the dragons running all sorts of ways like ants if you are cruel enough to pour water into an ant heap, which of course you never are. And the snow fell more and more. Then Effie turned the rain tap quite full on, and presently the dragons began to wriggle less, and by some of them lay quite still, so the children knew the water had put out the fires inside them, and they were dead. So then they turned on the hail, only half on, for fear of breaking people's windows, and after a while there were no more dragons to be seen moving. Then the children knew that they were indeed the deliverers of their country. "They will put up a monument to us," said Harry, "as high as Nelson's. All the dragons are dead." "I hope the one that was waiting outside for us is dead," said Effie. "And about the monument, Harry, I'm not so sure. What can they do with such a lot of dead dragons? It would take years and years to bury them, and they could never be burnt now that they're so soaking wet. I wish the rain would wash them off into the sea." But this did not happen, and the children began to feel that they had not been so frightfully clever after all. "I wonder what this old thing is for," said Harry. He had found a rusty old tap, which seemed as though it had not been used for ages. Its china label was quite coated over with dirt and cobwebs. When Effie had cleaned it a bit with her skirt, for curiously enough both children had come out without pocket handkerchiefs, she found that the label said "waste." "Let's turn it on," she said. "It might carry off the dragons." The tap was very stiff from not having been used for such a long time, but together they managed to turn it on, and then they ran to the mirror to see what happened. Already a great round black hole had opened in the very middle of the map of England, and the sides of the map had tilted themselves up so that the rain ran down towards the hole. "Oh, hurrah, hurrah, hurrah!" cried Effie as she hurried back to the taps and turned on everything that seemed wet. Showery, good open weather, nice growing weather for crops, and even south and southwest, because she had heard her father say that those winds brought rain. And now the floods of rain were pouring down on the country, and great sheets of water flowed towards the center of the map, and cataracts of water poured into the great round hole in the middle of the map, and the dragons were being washed away and disappearing down the waste pipe in great green masses and scattered green shoals. Single dragons and dragons by the dozen, of all sizes, from the ones that carry off elephants down to the ones that get in your tea. Presently there was not a dragon left, so then they turned off the tap named Waste, and they half turned on the one labeled Sunshine. It was broken so that they could not turn it off altogether. And they turned on Fair to Moderate and Showery, and both taps stuck, so that they could not be turned off, which accounts for our climate. How did they get home again? By the Snowdon Railway, of course. And was the nation grateful? Well, the nation was very wet. And by the time the nation had gotten dry again, it was interested in the new invention for toasting muffins by electricity, and all the dragons were almost forgotten. Dragons do not seem so important when they are dead and gone, and you know, there never was a reward offered. And what did Father and Mother say when Effie and Harry got home? My dear, that is the sort of silly question you children always will ask. However, just for this once, I don't mind telling you. Mother said, "Oh, my darlings, you're safe, you're safe. You naughty children, how could you be so disobedient? Go to bed at once." And their father, the doctor, said, "I wish I had known what you were going to do. I would have liked to preserve a specimen. I threw away the one I got out of Effie's eye. I'd intended to get a more perfect specimen. I did not anticipate this immediate extinction of the species." The professor said nothing, but he rubbed his hands. He had kept his specimen, the one that was the size of an earwig that he gave Harry half a crown for, and he has it to this day. You must get him to show it to you. The end.
Bravo, Gabriel Pan.
Yay.
That was a long story, but you made it seem like it was just a quick jaunting of words. It was very fun to hear from you. Thank you. Yes, we're celebrating dragons tonight because we won't be having any Game of Thrones episodes, new ones, until 2019. And I just got back from a great trip in Europe where there was so many dragons everywhere, or representations of them. Probably mostly because every time a group would uncover a dinosaur fossils, it was like, oh, another dragon, and they seem so real to so many people, don't they? But we'll have another dragon night soon, and I'll talk about some of the things that I saw in Europe. But I do have a couple stories that just came in from the Flynn boys, Liam Flynn and Daniel Flynn. Daniel sent in one to me just now on my phone. I think I'll use, and Peter Flynn, the father of the boys, is here, so I'll use your phone, Peter, because mine is about to die. So let's start with Daniel Flynn's the story that he wanted to have heard on the radio. And I sure want to read it, I'm telling you right now. And it's entitled The Viking Adventure, Part 5. The creature was all black with glowing red eyes. It slashed and heavily damaged the ship, but the Vikings, or Daniel and Scott felt like to get the tools like nails and hammers. Well, Scott said he will do it. Then he walked into a cavern and found gold and iron. There was a lava pit in there, so Scott melted the gold and iron into tools and weapons. When Scott got out, it was night. He found an old man, and they said, "Beware the night creatures." And Scott replied, "Why?" The old man spoke once again. "They will have you for dinner." Scott continued to the ship. He ran into a living potato. The living potato asked if he can join Scott, and Scott said, "Oh, yeah, you can join me." They continued to the ship and ran into a night creature. The potato grew bigger and ate the night creature. Then the living potato shrank back to the normal size. Once Scott got back to the ship, the Vikings repaired the ship and named the living potato Jeff. They hovered the ship to the biggest cave on the planet. After all, the Vikings, Scott, Jeff, and Daniel, went into that cave. They adventured deep into it. Then they found the X-Core. Daniel took the X-Core and escaped the cave with the others before it collapsed. Once they got out, the planet collapsed. Could this be it for our heroes? Find out next time on The Vikings Adventure. Oh, here's good news, ladies and gentlemen. Part 6 just arrived on the phone. Oh, my God. I guess I better read that. And here's Part 6 of The Viking Adventure from Daniel Flynn. Last time on The Vikings Adventure, Scott and the others found the X-Core. Then the planet collapsed when they were on it. Now let's get back to the story. When the planet was turning into a black hole, Daniel and Scott grabbed onto the ship and got in. They piloted the ship and saved the Vikings before the black hole was done. Jeff, the living potato, was still on the ship when it all happened. The Vikings put the ship into hyperspace mode and flew off. When it stopped, the old man from Planet X was waiting on solid Saturn, where the Vikings landed. Then the old man spoke, "Watch out for the oversized tribbles." Daniel and Scott got out of the ship with Jeff. They explored the planet. There was a Wild West-looking town not too far, so Daniel, Scott, and Jeff traveled there. there, standing at the entrance, was the most wanted outlaw on every planet but Planet X. The outlaw spoke in a Western accent. "You blew up my planet, didn't you? Planet X." The Vikings replied, "No." The outlaw attacked the giant horde of Vikings. The Vikings took him down, and the space police arrested the outlaw. In return, all the people in the town gave the Vikings Spam and beer. Oh, and they gave Scott 3 wishes, and Daniel a burger and fries with a large root beer. The potato got 5 wishes. Once they got back on the ship, they flew to Liam's universe. They landed, then met Homer and Bart. Daniel found a billion-year-old slice of pizza. Well, that might be a million-year-old slice of pizza. And there's no commas; it's hard to say. Now, this very old slice of pizza had a long gray beard. They found it. They found it behind the TV. Yeah, and Scott found a million or billion-year-old burrito behind another TV. Then the Vikings found a quintuple X large charcoal gray sweatpants with talking pockets. It was filled with old food. And of course, they found all this behind a TV next to a DVD player with a large chocolate chip cookie in it. Well, that was part 6. I feel a part 7 coming on. Thank you for sending that in, Daniel. That was delightful. I think I'll have a chocolate chip cookie soon. Now we know why the DVD player doesn't work. Oh, and I have time to read one from Daniel's brother Liam. Daniel is actually here, but he wants me to read it, and he printed it out, and it starts on this side of the page. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so here it is. So here's a story from Liam. This is a part 3 of the stories on Planet Sweatpants and Sweatpants Universe. Remember the 2 guys that asked the pizza guy to fix their sweatpants and boxers? When the pizza guy started driving away, they chased him to the end of the street while barking again. At least the next day, the pizza guy came back with their repaired sweatpants and boxers. Also, when they were getting scolded and lectured by Peter, he was using a lot of those funny 3 to 13 letter words. It was another wonderful day on Planet Sweatpants, in Sweatpants Universe. There were 2 brothers named Mo and Matt. They always wore sweatpants with talking pockets every day. They also thought that the whole idea of hiding and throwing food was hilarious, just like almost everyone else on Planet Sweatpants and Sweatpants Universe. Then one day they made macaroni and cheese for breakfast, and they hid about a quart of it under the couch to save for later. Then they made smelly sock soup for a snack before heading out to the house to go to their favorite store called Everything Co. That's right, Everything Co. It's a store with a tire center, gas station, food court, buy in bulk. Membership is needed to go there. Everything is really for a really good price, and they have almost everything you want or need. Well, they filled up 2 giant shopping carts completely of food and items from the store, and they decided to grab lunch at the food court afterwards. When they got home, they put everything away and decided to make double chocolate chip brownies because their best friend named Alex was coming over to visit for a few days the next day. On the first try, they burnt the brownies on accident because they left them in the oven too long. They used a hammer and nails to secure them onto the wall over the couch. On the second day, they got it right on that second try. For a snack in the afternoon, they made hot dogs and tater tots. When a hot dog fell on the ground, they hid it. Then they decided to hide food everywhere and splattered it all over the walls and ceiling. All of the food they hid either fell on the ground or was partly half or semi-eaten. Around 5, they went to the gym, and they didn't clean up the sweat they left behind. Oh, well. Around 6:30, they left the gym for the day, and on the way home, they stopped at Burrito World for dinner. They each ate 3 burritos and 1 bag of chips. They also drank all of the soda water in the restaurant. When Alex came over the next day, he stepped on the rug by their front door and said, "I don't remember this rug being so soft and squish." Burger. You know, here's what happened next. When he put his stuff in the guest room, he found a moldy, half-eaten burger on a shelf and exclaimed, "That's disgusting." Mo and Matt laughed. The next morning, Alex dropped something in the room with the couch in it, and he happened to look under the couch. He saw lots of food, underwear, smelly socks, and other things. Eventually, he found the thing that he dropped after finding fries ground into the floor. I'm going to have to go fast. We're running out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, here we go. He ground on the floor. When he was looking down, he gave the two brothers the funniest, most powerful, longest scolding, following with the funniest and loudest lecture afterwards. Then he stated, I know what we should do today, cleaning. He went around to the front door to get the volume and noticed that someone had ground food into the rug. He then picked up the rug to take it outside to clean and found slightly stale bread, stale hot dog, and burger buns, and another partly eaten burger and fries hiding under there. Then he made Mo and Matt move the couch with him. They found mac and cheese with soggy gray hair, old burritos with long gray beards, smelly slocks, lots of unidentifiable things and mold boxers and old donuts, stinky cheese, and much more. They also had to clean up the rotting bagel, old pieces of pizza with long gray beards and wrinkles and lots of other things. Then after they're done cleaning, they walked to the local park. Alex threw a stick to the brother and went chasing it. Alex was thinking, they're not dogs, but this is really funny and good exercise for them. After the park, they walked back home. Then they went to a state park to walk around in it. Then they went to Taco Bell for lunch. Oh, time is going on here. There, they met Mo and Matt, and they had a burping contest, farting contest, and funny face contest. After lunch, they went home to the movie theater. And then they found something fun to do. They ended up watching movies until 9 p.m. After the movie, they went to Dohai for dinner. And Mo and Matt decided to grind food into the carpet. They ground parts of a burger, fruit, parts of pancakes, scrambled eggs, fried eggs, omelets, fries, and anything they ordered. Make sure you tune in next time on Thursday the 25th to find out what happens next. Oh, I think I got the story done before we went off the air. Ah! There.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I think we're off. Good night, everybody. What? We're still on the air? So I could have read that story a little shorter then.
I see it.
I could have read it a little slower. But that was an excellent story. You can do a line roar, but don't breathe don't breathe too hard. Right? You know that. So here's our final iron roar for the night. Thank you so much.
Nowadays, internet devices are an integral part of your home. Everyone in your family has a smartphone, tablet, or a computer. Life is easier knowing that all your devices are secured and your family can surf the internet carefree. ESET Multi-Device Security Pack does just that. One license for all your devices. With ESET, it's simple to stay protected and save money. Enjoy safer technology with ESET Multi-Device Security Pack at ESET.com. That's ESET.com.
A podcast or radio show on WS Radio is a great way to create content marketing. Turn prospects into customers into raving fans. Contact Wade at WSRadio.com or call 866-WS-RADIO.
Attention business owners. If you feel like your business owns you and want to grow your company and get your life back, then get the Scale Toolkit at ScaleYourBusinessToolkit.com. Created by Wall Street Journal bestselling author David Finkel and Priceline.com co-founder Jeff Hoffman, this free collection of 36 videos and PDF tools will help you build a business, not a job. Go to ScaleYourBusinessToolkit.com today and learn how to work less by getting your business to produce more.
One person has the power to change the world, impact millions of lives, and leave a legacy for lifetimes to come. That person is you. In the New York Times bestseller, What is Your What? Steve Olsher, award-winning author and founder of the Reinvention Workshop, reveals his proven process that has helped thousands of men and women discover, share, and monetize the one thing they were born to do. Grab your free copy now at www.whatisyourwhat.com/free. That's www.whatisyourwhat.com/free.
Take a break from politics. Tune in and learn something. WS Radio shows are worth your time and are filled with tips and advice. Add us to your lunch routine, and we'll give you a meal for your mind.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, VinVillage.com, where wine lovers connect. Be sure to tune in weekly to Vin Village Radio for exclusive, in-depth interviews with the who's who in wine and food.
You take your smartphone almost everywhere you go. Now WSRadio.com can be there too. Search WS Radio in the Play Store for your Android devices or iTunes for Apple, and download the WS Radio application. WSRadio.com, on your phone and in your ear everywhere you go. Download the WS Radio application. Do it now. It's very easy. WSRadio.com.